What's happening, guys? Today I'm going to talk about what to do when the reverse diet is over and it's time to cut. I'm not only going to talk about some of the mindset things you need to keep in mind when you're going into your cut, but also what you should do with regards to how many calories to cut and how much cardio to increase by when it's go time. Alright, so before I get into the physical side of things and how many calories to cut and all that when it's time to cut after you've gone through a nice long reverse diet, I want to talk first about the mental side of things and some of the kind of traps that people fall into and what it means to go through a reverse and when it's time to cut. So one of the mistakes I think a lot of people make, or maybe one of the, I should say, misunderstandings with regards to a reverse diet, is that when you go through a nice long reverse diet, once you cut, it's going to be easy. Like, I really feel like this is kind of floating around out there, and perhaps it's partially my fault for not being a little bit more clear. I just need to put it out there that no matter what, no matter how good of a position you are in physiologically, a cut is always going to be a battle. It's always going to be a difficult thing, and you're going to get run down, you're going to get tired, you're going to get hungry, you're going to have to go through some mental and physical barriers, and it's going to be a grind. It's never going to be easy. This can make it easier, and I'm not saying that every single person who ever goes through any cut is just miserable. I'm not saying that at all. Sometimes, especially in the earlier stages, it can go really well. But it's always eventually, especially if you have a lot of weight to lose, it's going to be a grind. It's just one of these things, like, it's just physically difficult to diet. So sometimes what I see, and it just totally breaks my heart when I see people do this, is they'll go through a nice long reverse diet. They will literally spend like 6 months, 9 months, even a year reverse dieting, getting themselves in a position where they're just in a great spot physiologically to be able to make some killer progress. And then when it comes time to cut, they just don't really invest. They just don't really commit to it, and they don't go all in. And they just kind of flounder around, and they have a bunch of ups and downs, and the progress just doesn't go so well. And they end up feeling like, well, they just wasted all this time reverse dieting, and they feel like they've made themselves fatter for no reason. And it's like, no, it's because you didn't commit. You have to go all in when it's time to cut. Like, you need to take it really seriously and get rewarded for your hard work. Like, if you go through the process and you do things right and you put yourself in a position to see success, you will be rewarded for this, but you still have to work for it, right? You still have to work hard. You still got to put in the time and the energy and be really diligent with things, right? It's one of those things, like, you still got to go. You can't just kind of like dip your toe in the water and just kind of see how things go. Like, no, like, when it's time to go, it's time to go. Go hard. Now, that doesn't mean starve yourself, and that doesn't mean go crazy and that you should have no life, but it does mean that you need to take it seriously if you really want to see some good results. The people that see the best results are the ones that go all in right away, and they don't sit around and kind of worry about how things are going to work and worry about how it maybe won't work. You know, that's a common one. So because they're afraid of it not working, they don't really go all in, and they kind of eat low one day and high the other day and just kind of don't really pay attention that much, and they just don't really get after it. Whereas when people just go all in right from the start and hit it hard, they usually see really good results. Now, we may need to get to a point where we have to eat less calories than we thought. You know, just because you got your calories high does not necessarily mean you're going to be able to diet on more calories than you used to. It just means it's going to be more efficient. But everyone seems to have this certain kind of threshold of calories that you need to get to when you're cutting. So you may get your calories up to 2,500 calories when you're reversing. That doesn't mean if you cut to 2,000 calories that you're automatically going to start seeing results. You might need to drop down to 1,800, 1,700, 1,600. It just kind of like depends on your dieting history and your genetics and things like that. It seems like everyone has this kind of threshold to get to. So just because your body doesn't respond when you make that initial calorie cut doesn't mean that it was a waste of time. You just need to drop until you find that threshold where things get going. And it seems like for most people, once you hit that threshold, boom, things start going, and you start seeing really good results. You just have to find it at first. You definitely want to get away with as many calories as you can, but it may be less than you think, and especially if you have a long and extreme history of dieting, there's a pretty good chance that you're still going to have to be really aggressive when you diet this time. But again, like I said, this time it's going to work, whereas before it didn't. So, how many calories should you drop when it's time to cut? Now, obviously, this depends greatly on each individual. The longer I've worked with somebody, the more times they've gone through a cut and reverse, the better understanding I'm going to know for that person what works well for them, and everyone's going to be unique. But my general starting guideline for most people when you start the cut is to drop between about 400 and 600 calories to start. You want to make sure that you make an aggressive enough change to elicit a response, but not so aggressive that you have no more room to budge down the road. So what I mean by that is, if you just drop 100, 200 calories when you start, chances are your body's not going to really notice that. Or it's almost like you're kind of reverse dieting in reverse. I've talked about this before, but it definitely bears repeating. If you make small changes down in calories, what happens is your metabolism is going to adapt down to these smaller calories, but you're not going to see much change in body fat to happen. That's what happens when we do a reverse. You make changes in metabolism up, and you minimize changes of body fat by taking it slow and making minimal changes. If you make minimal changes down, the opposite happens. You don't lose much fat, but you slow your metabolism down. So you need to make a significant enough drop to actually elicit a response. So I find for most people between 4 and 6, along with some added cardio, which I'll talk about in a second, is a pretty good spot for most. Some people need more aggressive drops than that. Some people can get away with a little bit less, right? Like I said, the more I know somebody and the more I know about their dieting history, the more I can kind of fine tune it for them. And it really helps to kind of know your body and have gone through this process before, but it really depends on a lot of different things. But it's a good starting point. So if, say you drop 500 calories from your maintenance calories and you go through your cut and now it's not responding, right? Things aren't, you've gone 2 or 3 weeks, things aren't moving, and you just feel like it's just not working, right? This is when you go, okay, maybe drop another 150 calories or so, or another 100 calories or 200 calories, and try that and see if that works until you hit that threshold when things start moving, or maybe add in a little bit more cardio and see. But if it responds well, then you're good to go. And for a lot of people, that will be enough to get things going, but it's not always going to be enough. So I can't just give any hard, fast rules because it does depend on each person. Now, when it comes to how much cardio you should increase, I find that the initial increase in cardio should be, for most people, I mean, at least about a half hour. And this is per week, not per day. All right, a half hour per week, up to maybe around an hour per week is a good starting point for most people. I like to usually start between 45 minutes and an hour increase per week for a person starting on top of the calorie drop that we do, because you kind of want to shock the body a little bit, as much as I kind of hate that term. When you do start fat loss phase, you do want to shock the body a little bit. You need to make sure, like I said, you elicit that response. So by kicking up cardio a little bit, I find that works a little bit better. I used to try to do more calories and less cardio, but I've actually found that when you start a little bit less calories but more cardio, usually sees a little bit better response in helping shock that body and get some fat loss going. So then again, same thing, if it's not quite working out and you need to make some adjustments, you can add in some more. But again, it all depends. Some people just know right off the bat, we got to do a ton of cardio. Like some people, we might get them down to 40 minutes per week during the reverse, but then when it's time to go, it's like, all right, we're going to need 2-3 hours of cardio for the week right off the bat. They might end up getting up to a point where they're doing an hour per day in some cases. Hopefully that's not going to be you, but you just never know. Again, a lot of it has to do with not only genetics, but your dieting history as well, and what you're trying to accomplish, what your timelines are if you have one, and some of your goals. So it always depends. Everything always depends. These are just kind of general guidelines that are kind of universal to a degree, but obviously there's nuances for each individual. Another question I usually get is what to do with protein. Typically, I'm going to leave protein the same when we start. So say for instance, you're eating 2,500 calories and 170 grams of protein during your reverse. Once you go into your cutting phase, you may only be eating 1,900 calories, but you're still going to be eating that 170 grams of protein. So you want to keep the protein up so that you can maintain the muscle mass better that you have built. You want to make sure that you're getting that thermic effect of food that comes along with protein, which is extremely high. You want to make sure that you are using it to help feel fuller. It's very filling, so the more protein you eat, you'll feel fuller eating less calories, whereas if you drop your protein down, you won't feel as full, and that makes it harder to stick to your numbers because you're hungry all the time, so it has benefit from that. And there's just a lot of benefits from protein, so you want to keep it elevated. It wouldn't even be crazy to bump it up a little bit in some circumstances. Sometimes I'll drop it a little bit, especially if we kind of have to crush somebody right off the bat, which sometimes happens, and if they're going to be eating just a ton of protein and almost no carbs and fats, then that can be really challenging. So it might be better to drop it a little bit and give them a little bit more carbs, just so they will stick to the program better. But other than that, usually we'll keep it about the same. So anyway, hopefully this video helped. If you have any questions, please let me know. And as always, I will talk to you next time.
I'm addicted to the love that you're giving. Every minute, every day I've been craving.